wars are fought for three reasons: fear, pride, and interest.
What is so fascinating about Operation Sindoor that you came all the way from US to India to study it?
This is one of the reasons why Sindoor impressed me so much, is that
What would a successful invasion of Lahore or Karachi would look like?
from everything that I've gathered from India, is that they don't want war, right? They want development.
After doing all that,
After doing all that, which is more important, that India lost aircraft or that Pakistan failed to stop a single attack on a single site? India knows Pakistan better than anybody.
if you had to brief India's national security advisor, what would you warn him about?
Assumptions. I would love to see India get the F-35. And the U.S. military, honestly, would have really struggled with the Gaza situation.
Really?
Absolutely. And everybody's always wanting to do technology. Like,
Yeah.
I get more technology, I can have less soldiers. It's a bad trend. But I did the invasion of Iraq in 2003. As a paratrooper, I jumped into northern Iraq because I was on the ground looking for WMDs as a young soldier. They weren't there, of course.
You know, that's where the deep state comes in.
That's right.
So you served 25 years in the US Army, and now after retirement, you are a scholar. So soldier, scholar.
Yeah.
You have been researching on urban warfare. So that's your expertise. So as a soldier, first question I would like to ask you is about your first experience in urban war. So what was that day like when you first went there and you experienced it firsthand?
So yeah, I did 25 years in the U.S. Army as an infantryman. My first experience, because we were always practicing for everything, all types of environments, and I served in the jungles and the desert, everything. We always did urban warfare training, prepared, but I did the invasion of Iraq in 2003. As a paratrooper, I jumped into northern Iraq, but was quickly in a place called Kirkuk, which is a city fight. I mean, it really becomes overwhelming because being a soldier is about control. When you throw yourself into an urban environment, there's people around you, there's tall buildings, all of that. It's daunting for sure. Luckily, I didn't have a lot of urban fights during that tour, although I had some. Basically going into houses and behind every corner is a threat. I went back in 2008 during the height of what was sectarian violence in Iraq into Baghdad, and that was a whole different urban environment. That's a city of 6 million, and I know compared to Delhi and Mumbai, that's nothing. But for American soldier, that's a lot of urban. And I was involved in a lot of urban combat in places like Sadr City and in Baghdad in general.
When did you realize that this is something that is totally new and we have to, devise new strategies?
Yeah. From a tactical level, one of my first experiences as a commander, because we have things in the military that we always want control. And then we have this something called situational awareness where we want to know where everything is. One night on an ambush, or basically we're hunting down a terrorist who had been placing bombs on the roads. And I had my whole company in different locations, one at 6 feet or 6 stories up in a building. And then I had people marching around us. That was really the moment that there was no control. In the urban environment, there's so many inputs of information and so many dimensions. So I had people above me, I had people in directions I couldn't really tell where they were. That was really at the moment as a warrior, as we call warrior scholars, that I figured out this is not normal. This is different. I almost hit what we call cognitive overload. I really struggle with that moment. Later, I was working, though, academically for a 4-star general in charge of the U.S. Army in the Pentagon, our big building, where we looked at for over a year mega cities, so, very large cities, trying to see could the U.S. Army do an operation, or the U.S. military do an operation in a very big city like Mumbai, which is one of the mega cities.
Which cities were you looking at?
So any city over 10 million is a mega city, and there's about 30. We actually did a case study where we looked at Mexico City, Dhaka, Lagos, I think, New York City, these as just case studies on what would the military operation be, even if it's humanitarian aid after an earthquake or something. So we looked at all those cities for a year, and that's really where I discovered that the military in general is not ready for urban warfare.
Hmm.
Then I was teaching at West Point and started writing about even our experiences in Iraq, how we were using like concrete walls and things like that. For most militaries of the world, and even some part Indian military, don't want to fight in the city. They don't. Of course, none of us do.
Yeah.
But as I continued to study this now over a decade, that's where the battles are happening for many reasons. Like since World War II, we're a lot more urbanized, and there's a lot more people. And even in Ukraine, you try to have a fight, not in the urban. That's where you might have some stuff in the trenches in the open, but you're actually headed towards the city. All roads lead to urban. But militaries used to write into their manuals, avoid and bypass at all cost, because you don't want to have a urban battle.
So how was your experience in Iraq when it comes to civilians? Because you were in a totally hostile territory, and apart from insurgents and terrorists who were trying to blow you up, there are civilians also who think that you are an occupation force, so a foreign force that has come to their country, So, and by 2008, a lot of sectarian violence was also happening. So, totally hostile environment. How was that, like dealing with civilians who are not very friendly and who don't see you as their friend?
Yeah, I actually never experienced that.
Is it?
Yeah, there was, so especially in the first tour, of course, when we would go out to like the villages far out, and they just don't want to be messed with and want to be left alone. Yeah. Even the insurgency that was developed is less than 10% of the population. So most of the population are either very supportive, and we would go, build schools, hand out school equipment, everything. It was always positive, but then there was always this 10% that was trying to kill you. So as a soldier, that's really hard to deal with, though, because you're dealing with the population during the day, and then you're hunting terrorists at night. And to do that on and off switch, for some soldiers, that's hard to do. In my first tour, it was a little bit easier because we were focused on the Iraqi military in the opening months. So that's what we were trained to do, to fight another military. But then once you go into the urban environment, you're right, it's hard to deal with, okay, who's a threat and who's not a threat. I mean, we never really got straight hostility from a population.
Okay. But 10% of say 6 million people
lot.
is a lot. So.
Right. So it spread across. Those are loose figures.
Yeah.
But it's, in general, the people are supportive. And then we were also understanding the transitions to the mission. And now as I teach war, even comparing things in the Middle East from like the operation against Iran versus what happened in Gaza. There's an unlimited goal of like regime change and what we were doing, which is nation building. There are so many nuances and the differences there that it's really hard for other people, like civilians, to understand that. So my job in Iraq was about building stability so we could leave, especially in that 2008, 2009. I mean, they're the Shia Sunni divide, they're killing each other more than they are targeting us. But in order to create stability to leave, that's a whole very complex set of operations.
So do you think because of the experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan, US strategic thinking about regime change, shouldn't say regime change, but, building things there and, trying to create a new government, establishing things. Do you think that has changed fundamental level?
Absolutely. And we've dealt with that recently, and I've had to do a lot of writing because some people don't want to do the work to learn. So they want their 30 seconds of information. So they compare every war to Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And even in Iraq and Afghanistan, although they were both nation building projects, they're completely different in the societies, like what were the issues. I mean, Afghanistan, there's never been really a central government, but we were trying to build one, a legitimate one. The reading level of most of the population is very low. Most of the outside of the big cities just want to be left alone. There was never a central government. The central government was corrupt. So many issues of building a security force, all these things. Iraq was a lot different. And we actually did leave Iraq, and it was a functioning system when we left. Of course, as soon as we left, they instilled sectarian policies, which led to the rise of ISIS. There's absolutely in the American population, though, a lot of scar tissue of what we call I don't like the use of the word forever war, Iraq, Afghanistan, regime change, nation building. And we saw that very recently with Iran.
Yeah.
People started using these things. So I had to write stop comparing. This has nothing to do with Iran.
Yeah.
The mission is different. The level of, the nuclear threat, all these things. And I actually love that part of my job, is trying to help people understand, how is this nothing like Iraq, nothing like Libya, because for some reason people like to compare things.
I think it has a lot to do with the loss of trust people have in media and their leaders also, because they also see that what happened in Iraq, and there was no evidence of, later it turned out that there were no weapons of mass destruction, and they think that maybe the leaders are also lying about nuclear situation in Iran. So we can't trust them, so we have to apply pressure. So I think a lot of that has to do with this.
Yes.
What do you think?
And I've gotten that from some podcasters that think they are now geopolitical experts, and that say we were lied to in Iraq, we, the American population. And as somebody who studied it, not even beyond my own experiences, because I was on the ground looking for WMDs as a young soldier. They weren't there, of course, but I honestly believe that nobody lied to anybody, is that there was bad intelligence that became later known to be very thin and, if not fabricated, and that a bunch of people made decisions based on the information they had, which led to false assumptions and false information. There are so many nuances to Iraq. They lied to us. Nobody lied. A lot of actors, like the president and the National Security Council, made decisions on really bad and thin intelligence.
That's where the deep state comes in.
That's right. This is what we call something called revisionist history, right?
Yeah.
If you want to talk about the mistakes of Iraq, let's do that. But no, some people shortcut.
What do you think about this term, deep state?
Yeah. I'm not COVID didn't help. So COVID led to this idea of conspiracies.
Re-emergence of that thing.
Yeah, conspiracy. Don't trust anybody. The deep state, all these alter agendas, where now it's become deep state synonymous with government. Nobody, people want to live in this anarchic, transparent, no government secrecy thing. And they just call everything they don't know the deep state.
And what do you think, as a scholar, what do you think that does to a society over time if that persists?
We've seen where you have instability in societies based on misinformation, conspiracies. In general, though, in the social media world, is, as you know, it's its own world sometimes. But luckily, that doesn't translate as much into the government. Where it goes long term, I mean, the American society is so diverse that for somebody to say that's going to cause something to unravel, the American society is very big, very diverse. Each state is very different,
and kind of inherent, suspicion of the government always.
Yeah,
it's
but somebody's still got to run the things. People do that, like college universities. It's always your identity is to rail against something like the government, or I deal a lot with the misinformation around Gaza, but the world keeps on spinning despite that conspiracy theory or whatever it is.
As a soldier, I asked you your first-hand experience of the war. As a scholar, what do you think that there are 3 to 4 instances of urban warfare in the last century that have defined the tenets of urban warfare?
That's a good question. Actually, the Munich Olympic event really changed thinking towards urban warfare, and it's a really moment in history where it wasn't military, although it was kind of paramilitary with the German forces that responded to it, but it led to the creation of a lot of counterterrorism units in national levels. The German, the French, even the Black Hats in India, learning these close quarters battle drills that you see on TV and everything. Really, that failed operation on the Munich Olympics, and there were others in Israel, led to this creation of these close quarters battle drills. Unfortunately, that became, because people like mental models, the event that shaped everything. So that's one event. Absolutely. Then you have successes and failures. So you have the successes for the American military. Each military has their own history. The American military, of course, we have the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, and you have the Battle of Hue, where the Viet Cong and the NVA are able to hold the city for a little bit, and there's this massive, the biggest battle for the Marines since World War II. There's that event for urban warfare. And if you fast forward, of course, we had Panama City. These are very fast operations. But the first and second battles of Fallujah in 2004 were really unique, as in something was causing the U.S. military a problem they couldn't deal with.
For example?
So in the first Battle of Fallujah, which happened in April of 2004, there were 4 American contractors that were in a vehicle, and they were basically mobbed and attacked, and they all killed. And they were hung from a bridge, burned, and the population was celebrating. And it went global because we live in this, information is different. Information, even during the Vietnam War, wasn't as quick, although you could watch it on your TV every night. In the Iraq invasion, at that point, we were at the point where
cameras were everywhere,
right,
kind of.
Al Jazeera was inside the city, like it was aired globally. And the wars are fought for 3 reasons: fear, pride, and interest. The American pride was hurt. So the president ordered the Marine Corps to go into the city, very hostile city, for lots of reasons. Even during Saddam's regime, the city called Fallujah was a bad place with bad people in it. The U.S. forces went in, and then Al Jazeera was in the hospital airing photos of children being hurt and faking numbers of casualties. And the U.S. military, 6 days into it, was ordered to stop because the Iraqi interim government, the coalition, was threatening to fall apart if the Americans didn't stop because of urban warfare. Not because of what the U.S. forces were doing, but because of the perception of what they were doing. And that in urban warfare is different than any other terrain.
Absolutely.
Like you don't get that in Kargil, in the mountains. You don't get the population presence and the information presence, because everybody has a cell phone, everybody has a camera. That was something very unique, and the U.S. military was defeated because of that information operation in the urban environment. They wait 6 months or so. They surround the city. They empty the city of its population. But then they still have to have, in November of 2004, the biggest battle for the U.S. military of the entire Iraq war and there's just 3,000 terrorists inside the city at this point. But there's an election coming up, and they basically said, look, we have to finish the city and not be a safe haven. So they had this very, very lethal, very destructive battle in the city of Fallujah. And that pretty much which is interesting when I tell people, is we attacked Baghdad in 2003. It's a city of 6 million. And it went a couple hours, if not a couple days, because they didn't really resist. If you give an enemy time, though, and he's got the idea that they're going to hold the city to the last person, anybody can actually cause a military a lot of problems in an urban environment. So that Battle of Fallujah.
So they knew the attack was coming.
Yes.
Okay. So
they prepared for it. They put bombs in houses and prepared ambushes, and it was a tough fight for over 10,000 U.S. soldiers, tanks and jets, and a really awful fight. And they still had to clear like 68,000 homes. But that battle was bigger than the Battle of Baghdad because the enemy had prepared it.
Yeah.
We had used speed and shock and awe and everything to get to Baghdad quickly, and there was a fight, of course, but not what they thought was going to be a fight. After that, then you have the fights against ISIS that are really, for globally, kind of, you see the destruction of cities when somebody wants to hold it for a long time. You had Aleppo, Raqqa. Then you have the Mawari in 2017 in the Philippines. And then the biggest battle since World War II is the Battle of Mosul in 2016 to 17. So 100,000 Iraqi security forces backed by the greatest air power in the world, the U.S. military. It took 9 months to take the city back from just 5,000 enemy fighters. But the enemy had prepared for 2 years. So that's one of the lessons of urban warfare is if they've had a lot of time to get ready, it's going to be a really hard time to take the city or whatever it is. Those urban battles are pretty much in the American military, like the synonymous with the approach towards urban warfare and the lessons that were or were not learned.
So what are the lessons that you guys have learned and you have not learned?
I mean,
It need not be an exhaustive list, but a couple of...
I mean, it's the reasons I have job security is because
it keeps happening.
It keeps happening. And the militaries keep not wanting to do it.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't, right? But we fast forward and we see what happens in Gaza, which is really the culmination of everything. So the evolution of this is a non-state actor that can get into an urban area and use the laws of war against democracies, really, who really care about legitimacy and following the laws of war. Although there's some urban battles that happen not with the U.S. military, like Chechnya, like the Chechen wars in Russia, but they approached it very differently because they don't really care about the laws of war. So they did a lot of...
No democracy, kind of.
Yeah, it's not a democracy, and the legitimacy... then you had Bosnia, you had urban in Sarajevo, siege of Sarajevo. There's other events. The lessons that were learned is that you had to have infantry because urban environments require people.
Yeah.
And a lot of militaries have tried to shrink their militaries because they need less people in them because they cost a lot. It costs a lot of people to, to medical and pay and everything to have soldiers, and everybody's always wanting to do technology. Like,
yeah,
I get more technology, I can have less soldiers.
Exactly what's happening in China, and it's happening in India also.
Yep.
It's
a bad trend. It's that the urban environment has to keep happening in Russia. So Russia, before invading Ukraine, had reformed its military and reduced the number of infantry in its battalion task force groups. So it went into Ukraine and they had like 3 people on a vehicle and figured out that they really need infantry to clear and hold terrain. I'm not a fan of basically what we call strategic bombing theory, that you can just bomb your way to all your goals. I mean, there's a place for air power, but it doesn't achieve all your goals. Without an exhaustive list, of course, you still need infantry. You still need tanks. And a lot of people think that you don't need tanks in urban environments. If it's a contested urban battle, like the ones I mentioned, you absolutely need mobile protected firepower.
Even in the era of drones.
Even in the era of drones, if not more. Now you have to have, and this is what you saw in Nagorno-Karabakh, right? So you had Israeli and Turkish drones causing havoc on tanks because they didn't have protection against them. It's not that it makes the tank obsolete. It means your tank needs different protection.
Yes.
And so they started putting cages on top of their tanks, trying to...
I saw that.
Yeah, the coke cages. The overriding lesson of the history of urban warfare is you absolutely need a tank. And Israel has learned that and never forgotten it. So they lead with a bulldozer. Because in the urban environment, we call it the great equalizer. If I can pull you in there, it doesn't matter who you are, American, military, anybody. If I can pull you into the urban environment, I can reduce all your technology and power. So if you don't have a way to protect your soldiers, then I'll just cause a meat grinder and I'll kill all your soldiers who keep filing into the urban environment. You need mobile protected firepower, but you also, one of the reasons that a tank is very unique because it has usually a 120, if not 105, a big cannon. Because in the urban environment, again, unlike other environments, that every building is a bunker, basically. Concrete's really hard to shoot through. If you don't have, your rifle's not going to do much to a concrete wall.
True.
So you have a tank, it can punch through and hit the enemy who's hiding in the building.
And what are the lessons that, US has not learned or other similar militaries have not learned?
Yeah, I think one of them is just that we all want to design for the war that we want. So most militaries will design their militaries for the war that they think is coming.
Rather than, for the reality.
That's right. And I deal this all the time. There's always, even within the drones, and I love drones, but even within the drone world, you have these people saying like the future is this, unmanned, no pilots, no soldiers on the ground, just like having robot wars.
Yeah.
That's not coming anytime soon. So the lessons that they're not learning is that the urban is, despite the fact that everything you see, that all the work that I do, urban is not the future, it's the present.
Absolutely.
So but you look at their formations, right? So we look at even the US military or other people's militaries, Although India has a very mountainous operation, in the north, but they're not designed, not their equipment, not their tactics, really, not their primary, even their schools. All the militaries of the world, they do their schools like in the woods, or they do them in the desert. They don't do them in the urban environment.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the biggest lesson is,
think of it, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what they all do.
Yeah, they all do it.
Because of the historical reasons that they had to fight in jungles and, mountains.
Yep. And it's hard to change militaries, really. I mean, so their bases are where their bases are. Their training camps are where their training camps are. And I've dealt with this over the years too. Like if I wanted to train for an urban environment, I got to have a city. Not necessarily. I mean, it helps if you have a really nice urban environment to train in, but it's your thinking that's wrong, not your sites.
Yeah.
But this is a problem where the bases and the sites and the training areas do drive a way to think about war.
For example, if Indian military were to ask your opinion, and for example, they were to go in Karachi or Lahore tomorrow, that's a mega city, you can say, both. What would a successful invasion of Lahore or Karachi would look like from Indian point of view?
Yeah,
because we are not thinking right from that angle. I don't think anybody in India, at least at the military or maybe at the government level, is not thinking about that. That's why I think we are also cutting down on our strength of the army, focusing more on technology rather than hiring people. We are cutting down on recruitments. So those are the changes. So clearly the invasion is not on the horizon, but theoretically, as a scholar.
Yeah. So it isn't about invading another country because, I mean, that's of course not India's position. You have two nuclear armed countries. It does change the strategic thinking. Any operation that involves terrain, even in the border security, you need lots of soldiers. And this should be a lesson from Israel's operation, because they as a society had shrunk their military, relied on sensors and all of this stuff. Some things you just need, you need to pay the price for percentage of the GDP, all of that towards security, which also means actual people guarding the walls so that the nation can be safe.
True.
From everything that I've gathered from India is that they don't want war, right? They want development. They want to be the third largest GDP, digital nation, setting the standards, now exporting military technologies that are incredible.
Yes, but after doing all that.
After doing all that, my advice would be careful on the technology replacing soldiers. There's no future. Of course, technologies can enhance everything. And even manned, unmanned teaming, all of these things that we use. But when you start to reduce your military down under those assumptions, it's really bad. And people usually pay a price for that.
Yeah.
Don't let that happen. So my recommendation would be not for an invasion, but for even preparedness, deterrence. A strong military means peace.
Okay, I will ask that in a different style. But first we'll discuss the case study of Israel and, Hamas.
Yeah.
So you have been to Gaza 3-4 times?
4 times. Yeah.
4 times. What was the most striking thing that, it was for you when you visited that place?
It's, I've been studying urban warfare, every urban battle that's ever happened, from Stalingrad, all the ones we've ever heard of, to ancient warfare, castle warfare, everything. There's nothing that I've seen that resembles Gaza for many reasons. One is just the sheer level of destruction because what was prepared. I think I told you, like with the Fallujah and Baghdad and Mosul, how long the enemy, basically, or whoever's controlling the ground, has to prepare, the worse the fight's going to be. So Hamas, for over 15, almost 20 years, prepared every inch of Gaza for war. Rather than building skyscrapers or anything, even water treatment plants, they built war tunnels. They built houses full of explosives. That level of preparedness calls for a massive amount of fights that hasn't been seen.
So they knew that this day would come one day, definitely.
There's no other explanation for 400 miles I don't know what that is, kilometers, like 500 kilometers of tunnels that no civilians allowed in underneath every structure. I used to say they put a tunnel under every mosque, school, and hospital, but in some cases, they put the tunnel and then built a mosque or a school on top of it.
And it was all connected.
In many ways, I mean, there is some for local forces but they had prepared every inch. So they had 24 battalions of Hamas, each one of them controlling certain neighborhoods, and they had their own tunnel system. There are some tunnels that connect areas, and in some cases, you could enter northern Gaza and come out in Egypt, basically.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how big are these?
Some of them, so I was in one in December of 2023 that was a 2-mile long tunnel that you could drive trucks through.
Truck?
So
Seriously?
Seriously, it was an invasion tunnel. And they had a couple of these. And then some of the ones along the Egypt-Gaza border are like that as well. But this is I've only been in one that was similar because I've been in one in, I do tunnels as well.
Yeah.
In North Korea, South Korea, there's a tunnel. There's a couple that they found in the 70s, and there's one that's still open, tunnel number 3. It was similar as big. A giant tunnel that you could drive cars through.
Crazy.
But most of them aren't that. Most of them are
just to move people.
Yeah, just to move people and rockets, because they use them to move the rockets that they're going to fire, but are like 1 meter wide, 3 meters tall, very narrow. But it's just so many of them, and nobody's ever faced that. Even if you look at all the tunnels of past wars, even like Vietnam, the tunnels of Kuchi and others, nobody's ever faced in the urban environment such an underground. So you're basically having a fight on the surface, and there's a whole other city underneath you that you still have to fight for. And that's where the hostages are, because there's the hostage element. That's where the fighters are. That's where everything is. The leadership is underground.
And one big factor is civilians, of course.
To have civilians trapped.
Yeah.
So of all these other urban battles I talked about, like Fallujah and others, you get the people out of the way. You do evacuations, and we all hit military history, like you drop the flyers and tell them to leave, give them some time. Gaza, because Egypt closed the gate and said nobody can come in, is very unique, as in the civilians trying to move them out of the way is really hard to do. And they did, in many cases, into one area. And even after 2 years, there's areas that the IDF haven't been to because that's where they moved the civilians to. But it's a unique war because I can't think of any other ones, not Ukraine, Syria, Chechnya, nowhere where the civilians weren't allowed to leave. But because of Egypt in this case, it said, you can't come through here, that they've all been trapped in there.
But for example, for us, and I'm sure there's the same for the other countries also, for civilians who are thinking that every day they read, 40 civilians killed, 50 civilians killed. Every day we read news like that in India also. As far as Indians are concerned, they are strongest supporters of Israel. But when you constantly, read that every day, you also start to think who is right, who is wrong here.
Yeah. And it's a great question. And I've been really busy trying to help people understand it. One, like we just did, put it in context to anything that's ever happened before. The uniqueness, and we didn't even talk about, again, Hamas, unlike everybody thinks we all have shared human values, right? So we all want our children to grow up to be better than we were. We want to protect our families, all of this. I've never seen in war a combatant, basically an enemy, whose goal is to get its population killed. And they say this openly. It's not me that says it. It's like Hamas says we need the death. And of those, like the tunnels we were talking about, there's 2.2 million people in Gaza. All of them could fit in the tunnels with ease, and not a single one is allowed. On October 7th, Hamas, the governing authority of Gaza, invaded Israel with the purpose of destroying it. They had hoped that Hezbollah would join them and that people in the West Bank would join them. Luckily, that didn't happen for many reasons. But they invaded. So Israel, as a nation, declared war against Hamas with the goal of returning the hostages, of course. 250 hostages illegally taken. Women, children, Holocaust survivors, like you name it. Awful. But also to, like in other wars, if we go back to wars of any similarity, to remove the people that attack you from government, not just take away their ability to ever launch an attack again. That difference really makes it hard for people to understand, because then they start, and this is where I came involved as an urban warfare guy, is like, why are you comparing this to Mosul? Because in Mosul, ISIS had taken a city in Iraq. It wasn't the government, and was just holding the city within a nation. Hamas was the governing authority of this territory, invaded Israel, rightfully so, waged a war against them, of course, to get the hostages back, but also to destroy their military and to remove them from power and make sure that nothing ever comes from Gaza again. So it's basically regime change, although people don't like to use those words. And in order to do that, it isn't like these other limited operations where the goal is to establish deterrence or anything like that. No, the goal is, even in Israel, like against Hezbollah, that was to reestablish deterrence and to remove their rocket capabilities. In Gaza, though, it's really trying to explain to people what would be similar is like World War II, right? The removal, the ultimate surrender of the Japanese and the Germans, the destruction of their militaries, the removal of the ability to govern their countries, basically. That's what's really hard to get people to understand, because they only remember what they lived through. So they only think counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, and all these limited operations.
But what I don't understand as an Indian,
Yeah.
the US completely supports Israel's goals in Gaza, right? And I'm pretty sure, I don't have the numbers, but I'm pretty sure Pakistan has killed more Indians than, what Hamas has killed in Israel.
Okay.
Right. But when we go to, this small operation, it could have been a war, but, US quickly comes in. You guys stop it. I know the nuclear angle is there,
Yep.
But when it comes to Israel, it fully supports it. Is it just because of geopolitical reasons, or there is something more to it?
I'd argue, having studied a lot of war, especially in Israel, that it is usually that, and Hamas was counting on that the United States and the international community would just stop them. Okay. So if you look at the Yom Kippur War, the 6-Day War, even Gaza War, 2008, 2014, all of them, the international community says you have to stop. Even after the 6-Day War, Israel can be attacked by 5 nations at one time, fight them back and defeat them, like in the Yom Kippur or the 6-Day War, and then the United States comes in and goes, look, you got to stop. And you can't, that land, that you got to give that back. So Israel, there's actually an Israeli standard in war. Israel's never been able to win a war. I think because of the brutality of October 7th, of course, the world, rightfully so, and the United States standing next to Israel, like, of course, you can do an operation to get but we support you in returning the hostages and support you in destroying Hamas. Now, where the problem comes is in the numbers, right? Civilians being killed, things like that. I have all this knowledge from past urban battles and say, look, they're actually doing very well given the context of a place prepared for 20 years for war, a enemy who doesn't wear military clothes. So who is saying civilian or combatant? In my world, there's only combatants and non-combatants. So you do have to factor in a radicalized population who are, like you asked me about Iraq, like
Absolutely.
they were indifferent, if not happy. They were indifferent to us. In Gaza, you actually have not just Hamas, you have Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Lion's Den, like Martyrs Brigade, like all these other terrorists who then attack the IDF. So they're legal targets. But this has been the first world war, although there's, when the Syrian war was happening, like 300,000 dying. I mean, for 10 years, I think it was 23 people a day died. And there's nobody saying, well, you got to stop or we're going to do something about it. In Yemen, there's the actual starvation and everything. There's always these double standards in the international conversation. The thing about, how many civilians are dying? And I've seen Indian TV do this, right? According to Palestinian authorities, this many civilians died today. Okay, one, there's no information coming out of Gaza that isn't Hamas approved. Yeah, right now, Hamas is losing a little bit of authority, but the The Gaza Health Ministry is actually the Hamas Gaza Health Ministry. So, of course, they want the number to be as high as they can be. And I fight this, what I call lies, damn lies, and statistics, where Hamas wants the number to be as much as possible. So it doesn't matter what happens, everybody's a civilian. According to the Palestinian Gaza Health Ministry, or the Hamas, there's not been a single Hamas member that's died. It's all civilians. So who's the person on the honest broker saying, okay, that person that died, that person was a civilian, innocent civilian. And that person was a Hamas or helping in fighting in some way. And this is, I've been pretty vocal about this because I think it's really important for the future of war. It's like, how are we taking the enemy's voice on how many civilians are dying? And then people play all these statistical games. Well, look at the children, John. So like there's a certain number of children that have died. And of course there have been civilians that have died, and that's awful. And Hamas wants those civilians to die. But like the children element, the United Nations classifies anybody that's 18 and below a child. So when you hear the numbers of how many children have died in Gaza, it's anybody who's below the age of 18. I joined the military at 17. Hamas's average recruit right now is 16. So of course there's a high number of civilians. It's also a population with 50% basically below the age of 18. But that being the overall determination of whether this is good or bad. I mean, all war is bad. The question is Israel targeting civilians? And there's not one case of that. Is Israel allowing for a too high of a civilian death rate in what we call collateral damage? There's no evidence of that. And then they try to do these numbers games to say that. Look, civilians die in war. That's why you try to get them out of harm's way. For anything, we should be blaming Egypt for a big part of this. To this day, even today, Egypt could open the gate and create a displaced persons camp in the Sinai, which is way away from Cairo, and let civilians who want to get out of the combat, and then they could target Hamas and speed up the process.
But wouldn't that allow, Hamas people also to go?
Yeah, Israel's really good at facial recognition.
Oh, okay.
So they've learned, even since I've seen this myself. They surround a hospital and they call everybody out, and Hamas is like dressed up like patients or doctors, and they just use facial recognition to pick them out. But it would just speed up the process because Hamas has survived this long by using the population as a shield.
How good is Israeli intelligence? Do they know everyone in the Hamas organization, and who are the recruits, everybody who's employed by Hamas directly or indirectly?
It's a good question. And there's been a question about artificial intelligence helping with that, which is a good thing, right? Intelligence sifting. I mean, this is the thing about who is Hamas. Because, what was Hamas on October 8th? Most of them are gone. But Hamas is an organization, so they have one leader, I think, left, maybe, of the original kind of hierarchy. Because I've been in Israel and seen like the entire organizational chart for all the brigade commanders. They have very good intelligence on who was Hamas on October 7th. Hamas has, of course, recruited more radicalized teenagers and everything, because they start radicalization at birth. I mean, they have basically Palestinian Sesame Street teaching people to basically want to kill Israel and the Jewish people. Their intelligence is very good. But this is where I try to help people as well. Is like the goal is not to kill all of Hamas. That's never the goal in war in general. It's about what is the removal of Hamas as the governing authority. And even after World War II and everything, General Eisenhower, the American general in charge, said it would take 50 years to de-radicalize the Nazi people. And it didn't take 50 years for a reason. But even if, let's say, Hamas as a political organization tomorrow signs a deal saying, we give up, here's your hostages back, and we agree that we're no longer going to be in power, there's still a lot of Hamas there. And if they weren't a part of the atrocity of October 7th, they can like sign papers, and it's called reconciliation, which is very normal in war as well. It's almost like, and this is unfortunate to say, that the world forgot what war looks like. So they want short wars. That's not the history of war. They want bloodless wars. That's definitely not the history of war. So like the civilians, and I hate to do this for people, I don't want to be gruesome. Like, whatever the number is that Hamas says the civilian casualties are, if you look up like even the Korean War, which is a big war, right? But most people viewed it as a just war. There were 2 million civilians that died in that war. That's 54,000 civilians a month for every month of the war. Nobody was saying genocide during the Korean War. But for some reason, despite all the information contrary to what Israel does to try to get civilians out of harm's way, they say genocide because of the number.
I think the big reason is, of course, social media. You saw
That's right.
gruesome images floating on social media and a lot of misinformation also. And I think it has done a lot of PR damage for Israel. I think if you look at the history, this currently what we are witnessing in US, at least on Twitter and other social media platforms, I'm seeing unprecedented levels of anti-Semitism and, conspiracy theories about how the Jews control the world and even the US president. Don't you think?
Absolutely.
And this is something that is a big PR loss for Israel, I think.
We can talk about that because even I before I came here to study Operation Sindoor, somebody came to my house to work on something, and I said where I was heading. They're like, "Oh yeah, Pakistan knocked all those Indian jets out of the sky," and I'm sure they got that from social media because a lie can travel around the world before the truth puts its pants on.
Yeah.
In social media, it's worse. I think that is the change in warfare that nobody is accounting for. And governments truly struggle with this. And although this is one of the reasons why Sindoor impressed me so much is that not just the Indian government, but the Indian military were communicating daily. Like this is our limited goal. This is not about Pakistan or the Pakistani people. This is about terrorism, exactly what was hit, when it was hit. This social media aspect in war, because especially in urban environments, but there's so many cell phones, it's always been present in war. And I'm not a historian, but it's never been like it is now where everybody gets fed the negative of war on their cell phone. So every dead body gets sent to every citizen through TikTok and X and everything. You can win, and this has always been the case, even in Vietnam, you can win every battle. But if you lose the support of the people in a democracy, then you lost the war.
Absolutely.
So the information domain, and this is Sindoor, very short operation, but it's a very big case study on how to communicate as much as you need to, despite even like the jets being down. And I saw the Indian military that's not true. They didn't knock down 6. They may have knocked down 1, but that's not the conversation, and trying to get ahead of that. That's the big change. So it's not the drones or the tanks or nothing. It's that the world can watch a war instantly, but they're looking through a soda straw. And this has really been the problem that I've tried to help people with as well. Like I had Joe Rogan for us, for like the Gaza war, watch a video clip and go, oh, of course, innocent civilians, because he saw a 30-second clip of 3 people walking in a field, and because they don't know anything, just makes their assessment. So it's like you can see in the war like you never could, but only through a soda straw, because you're seeing whatever the person that created that clip wants you to see. There's so much to this that I've been studying now for 2.5 years. When it comes down to the execution of the war, though, is like I'm the guy going, no, Israel's doing more than anybody's ever done to protect civilians under a condition that nobody's ever fought in. And luckily, actually, it was so the Biden administration wasn't that favorable to Israel during the war. Of course, they supported them. They hit. Of course, you had the right to go try to return your hostages, but you just can't do it that way. And I've been dealing with this with Piers Morgan and others. Well, I don't know how to do it, but not this way. I can tell you a way that would have worked better, which was do it with more force in the beginning, because that's what wins wars: is speed, audacity, not protracting it. So when, I would have encouraged Egypt to let civilians out, the restricting of where Israel could go, all these things from the population, although there's kind of this idea of what is happening based on TV. Israel had to fight a 7-front war during this. So Israel wasn't just fighting Gaza during all this. Of course, they had to fight in the north, they had to fight against the Houthis. Now it's had to fight Iran, all while trying to win a war that would have been incredibly hard for any military of the world, even the U.S. military. And the U.S. military, honestly, would have really struggled with the Gaza situation.
Really?
Absolutely. Not prepared for that level of dense urban we would have lost, I think, a lot more soldiers. We would have used more force because we have more force, and we don't have to listen to the international community. Although what happened in that Fallujah situation was because the Iraqi government was going to disband. It wasn't because somebody was saying, well, we're going to not give you things that you need to protect yourself, which is what the United States did to Israel during this.
Yeah.
Like, if you do something, then we're not going to send weapons. But there was a lot of people actually believing the misinformation about what was happening, believing the civilian casualty numbers, even though there's so many issues with those numbers. Even this civilian to combatant ratio, and I've been very vocal on this for every nation of the world, is that that's never been asked of any nation in war. But what's your civilian to combatant ratio? Because that's not the way war works.
You know, if you take the US example in what they did with Afghanistan after 9/11, you know, they went in, and then when you go and you fight people, there are so many martyrs that you create in that society. And then that radicalizes another set of population. Pretty sure that same thing is happening in Gaza also. And everywhere you go, Iraq. So this is very like, what do you do? Right?
So I've dealt with this a lot too. Again, this is, it's called the insurgent math. So it's the idea that you're creating more terrorists than you're killing.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a very big principle in counterinsurgency, counterterrorism operation. That's not what Gaza is. That's like saying, like,
don't you think it will create more radicalized people with all this?
That one, they're already radicalized enough, and so I think it's just it's such a bad comparison. Of course, you have to give, and you're seeing that now. You have clans in Gaza who don't want Hamas because of what Hamas led them into. But from a straight war perspective, if the idea that the population sentiment towards you while you're trying to remove their leadership is a factor, would be crazy. That's like asking, like polling the Japanese population during World War II going, do you support the emperor's war? They thought he was a god. Of course, 100% would say, of course, we will all die for him. That's not war. That's counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. We defeated the Taliban in 2 weeks. Yes, they ran over to Pakistan and hid in Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
But for 20 years, we were trying to create a government that never existed. So that's where we failed. We didn't fail in defeating the Taliban.
Absolutely.
We also didn't fail in Iraq. We beat the Saddam regime in a matter of 2 weeks.
Now you could have left.
And could have left, but we decided to stay. That was a mistake. And then it took us 6 years to figure out this whole counterinsurgency thing. That, yeah, you have to protect the population so they'll give information about the 10% terrorist that's there. That isn't Gaza. And that's what I've really been trying to, I've been on a war path about that. I was like, yes, you want to protect the civilians and you want the civilians to see that you're protecting them. But to the idea that you shouldn't be ruthless against the enemy because it might radicalize the population is not the way war is fought.
Yeah.
No, you want to be ruthless to the enemy and achieve your goals, whatever the goals are. In this case is to remove them from power, which involves killing them. But it's really about their will. You want to convince them that they don't have a chance to win. And unfortunately in Gaza, though, there's been a lot of international signals that if they just keep doing what they're doing, they might win. Like getting civilians killed, like trying to create a humanitarian crisis on food and all that. But this idea that you're creating more terrorists than you're killing is good in counterinsurgency, counterterrorism theory.
But it's not a factor for militaries when they go in.
Absolutely not. It's crazy, right? If you look at any major war that's unlimited, where the goal is to overthrow that government.
Yeah.
It's just not. But it's so rampant in our societies because they remember the counterinsurgency, global war, and terrorism.
You talked about, Taliban moving to Pakistan.
Yes.
Had you taken care of Pakistan, first and then moved to Afghanistan, things would have been quite different. But are there any lessons from the Israel-Gaza conflict that could be applicable for India when they, for example, in a hypothetical situation, if they go and, try to take over Pakistan occupied Kashmir.
Okay.
So
There's always lessons. Sometimes we say they're not lessons learned, they're lessons relearned, because militaries are bureaucracies, but they're also ways of thinking.
yeah,
So they think about their problems their way. And even Israel faced this about they didn't know how to communicate. So of course the lesson that, again, what was shown in Operation Sindoor is that India recognized that messaging was important, not just to the Indian population. What is the goal here, right? And I heard, former Indian generals saying like, "Oh, this is our chance. We got to take them out."
yeah.
Things like no, the government was communicating this very limited goal, but it was also communicating to the Pakistani people like, this is not about Pakistan. This is not about the Pakistani people.
And on the first day of the strikes, after the first day of strikes, they said that even Pakistan military is not our target.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's a lesson, right? Israel doesn't do public relations.
doesn't differentiate.
It doesn't communicate well, but there's reasons for that. So that's absolutely a lesson. Then there's always, I wrote this article recently trying to help people understand what strategy is in war, right? So one of the lessons is that you have to have what we call ends, the goal, and you have to have the ways and the means. So you have to apply the capability you need to achieve the goal that you've set. And the goal can change in war. For Sindoor, it was very clear what the goal was, but then they applied the appropriate across the whole echelon from the political, although there's democracies really struggle with that political to military divide, right? The military sometimes will say something and the politicians are saying something different. There was an alignment here. So for me, it's not necessarily of course, there's all kinds of things that can be learned from Gaza tactically, as well as, things different at the strategic and operational level, as communication was a big one, the perception lies, and you have to put out information to combat that, right? So you can't address every lie, but you can put out truthful information every day, like which I thought all the DGMOs were there presenting their, Army, Air Force, Navy. That's the level of communication you have to do on a day-to-day basis in the current operating environment. So in Gaza, that would have been helpful for the world to know, like, okay, not allow for all these stories to
the
run
PR war they are losing.
It's the information. I wouldn't call it PR. It's just information. The information
Asymmetry.
Yeah, whatever the right term for it. Of course, there's also for India, like you said, about the size of the military. Whatever the mission is, you got to make sure you have the right capability to do that. The problem with militaries who they imagine the crisis that they want to deal with. So even being adaptable, like Ukraine learned, but actually it was the West that learned that we didn't have the capability to grow fast. We didn't have the capability to, even if we don't maintain certain stockpiles of weapons, we didn't have the ability to even make more, whether it's artillery rounds or interceptors or whatever. So what in India is the thing that somebody is saying, well, we don't need that much of whatever it is.
Yeah.
Manpower. Yeah. Or air defenses. Like, we don't need that much. Well, you might need more than you think you do. So you need a defense industry that can create something really fast. And I know this has been why I'm here to study as well, is India's really cut back on its foreign dependency for certain capabilities, right? This Make in India reliant thing was also about, if there was a crisis, you're not relying on somebody else to produce that.
Because then the pressure comes.
Then the international pressure, right? So the strategic independence, which India showed in this case, which I wrote that as the lesson, is that in order to have strategic independence, you can't, but I'm not an America first means America alone person either. The strength of all nations is your connections. But yeah, that dependency variable is always there.
About the Ukraine war, what are the biggest lessons when your cities are under attack, both from the defense's point of view and from the attacker's point of view?
What can a military learn?
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote this, why Russia failed in the beginning. Because Russia tried a Western way of war, which is speed, and basically hitting a cognitive win, right? So like we did in Baghdad, we drove a tank in the middle of the city and run circles around and raise the flag, the military said, look, we don't have a chance, and they all went away. That's what you want in war. Russia tried that in Ukraine and faced something completely different because it underestimated the Ukrainians. I actually wrote a book for the Ukrainians in the opening days. In the cities, what can civilians do to help the military, right? Which is an ancient, actually, theory of what's called home defense, where everybody is going to defend the nation. So even in the border areas, which is really historical as well, is that those border villages, communities are the first line of defense.
Yeah.
They're going to hold the enemy so the military can come. I wrote a book for Ukrainians on how to turn every street into a battle, right? Park the trucks and the buses and the dump trucks in the street. You slow the military down. If the military is relying on a small force, going back to what we're talking about, who can get into something really quickly and achieve a cognitive goal, because again, the goal is not to kill all of your enemy's military, it's to beat them the will to fight.
Yeah.
If they think they've lost, they won't fight. Russia ran into civilians blocking the roads and turning every street into a battle. And I wrote this book, which is now in 17 different languages, because every nation from Taiwan to Poland to everywhere has this idea of like, well, if we get invaded, we'll all defend. Despite most civilians don't know how to hold a gun, let alone what to do if they're being invaded. They're looking for somebody to come save them. And that's a huge lesson in urban warfare. If the civilians are against you, look at Gaza.
It's very difficult.
It's very difficult, and it can also defeat you.
Do you think that China will learn this lesson when it comes to Taiwan?
Absolutely.
They will think 10 times before doing that?
Yep, they did. That was a big signal. And so both the Taiwanese learned something from Ukrainians. If we're going to do this, we have to hold for a certain amount of time. War is also about time a lot as well. And this is what happened in the Ukrainian war, is that the U.S. intelligence estimated that Ukraine would fall in 3 days. After being on the ground in places like Kyiv, that was a legitimate assessment, and they could have had certain things not gone wrong for Russia and certain things not gone right for Ukraine. Absolutely, in the China taking of Taiwan situation, Taiwan's looking at that as we need to be ready, not just our military, but everybody. Because if you have any chance that anybody coming to your aid, although the United States has the one China policy, it doesn't necessarily say it will defend, but it will defend. It's weird. But if China learned the lesson that if you're going to do this, you better do it quickly.
Yeah.
So both sides learned. If Taiwan wants to save itself, it has to hold for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, but with Taiwan, the problem is you can't do it quickly. I mean, even if China wants, it will take a lot of time.
So you can't. So assumptions are really bad in war. So, like,
what is your assessment?
That China hasn't been tested. So I think war tests militaries. We tested. I used to be in briefings where the Russian military was the second most powerful in the world. It's not even the second most powerful in Ukraine now. War puts militaries to the test. And again, Sindoor put the military, the joint integration, all this stuff to the test. Of course, they learned lessons. I'm not saying India was perfect, but war put Pakistan military to the test, and they couldn't stop anything. And so for China doing its own operation, it hasn't been tested like that. So I think it might go wrong, not because of how strong Taiwan is, but how your military performs when put to the test.
Well put.
Thanks.
One question that I wanted to ask about Ukraine-Russia is how the introduction of drones, compared to artillery, how that has changed the game on the ground. Because, Russians, as you said, they thought that they will just go in and, blast everything and they will hoist the flag. But now everybody is talking about Ukrainian drones.
Yep.
So how that has factored in, and what are some of the strategies that have, militaries have found to counter this drone warfare?
So it's an evolving process. I live in the world, as I was talking about, I was in Nagorno-Karabakh after the 2020 war, because that was really, people were calling it the drone war because of how effective they were at taking out Armenian forces. I went there to study, like, wait a minute, that wasn't the only thing that was going on here. You had a lot of Azerbaijanis moving through the woods with heavy stuff on their back. You had artillery battles, things like that. But for some reason, this is what the world does. Like, oh, that's the thing. In Ukraine, after the initial year of these static defenses, Ukraine went on the offensive for a little while, but there were drones present in 2014. Ukraine had basically their version of DRDO working on not just drones, but also the battlefield management of the sensors. So that's how they defeated the Russians in the beginning, is they could see where the Russians were. So they were able to move limited resources because of the drones and the system called Delta that they had. As the war evolved, drones became more and more prominent. Like you said, they're 90% of what calls in artillery at this point. Now they have wired drones with the fiber optic wire because there are electronic ways to beat drones, and then there are direct fire ways to beat. Although I'm really interested in India's work on directed energy, to use directed energy, because there's a cost problem here, right? So if you can make 100,000 drones a month, and you can swarm them, then it takes more to knock those down than you to produce them. Yeah. Ukraine's not a drone war. Yes, the drones, because both sides suck at air power. So nobody has air superiority in Russia, not Ukraine. So the drones have become a very big part of, as well as two static lines. When you have fixed positions, the drone, especially a tethered drone, it's going to give you a bunch of advantages and disadvantages. And both sides are working on electronic warfare, and both sides are developing drones, because it's not Ukraine. Sometimes Russia is like dominating Ukraine with drones. It's because of the nature of that war and what both sides have. And that's again why I'm here, because of how effective India was at what Pakistan thought would be their drone war, and sent a drone swarm towards India. But because of D4S and Akash and like so many other elements of an integrated air defense, that's the lesson of the drones.
Even Indians were surprised at drone capabilities of India.
I know. I didn't know that they had. But listening to the generals talk about,
because we have been talking in India, for example, and look at China. We should learn from them what they are doing. Absolutely wonderful. What are we doing here? And now that we saw what the capabilities were, that we didn't even know.
Yeah, and I think there's still learning to be done as what got through and things like that. Drones are definitely always will be present in warfare, and in Gaza. The Israelis went into Gaza with not that many drones. They had drones in the sky that could supposedly see things. But in the urban warfare, you need a drone that goes into every room before you do. Because if I can teach people how to hold ground, but I can also teach people to attack. Today, you need a drone to go inside that room before you do, or down that street, or around that corner. And even the Indian army, I can guarantee you, doesn't have that right now, because they don't think they're going to be fighting urban battles. Yeah. So they don't have those cheap, expendable drones to put in front of the infantry. They'll have the ones in the sky, like the Turkish TB2 and the Israeli Harap, like these more costly drones in the sky. When it comes to the ground fight, if you're going to take the ground, you need a lot of other drones as well. Yeah. So there's a lot of misapplied lessons to the Ukraine war on the drone aspect that won't apply to other people. But you can't not learn the lessons as well. But there's so many nuances that are, gives me job security, because, that war is so much different. But militaries love to now go, well, look, as we see over here, even though that's not the war you're going to be fighting.
So Operation Sindoor, you are here in India to do research on it. What is so fascinating about Operation Sindoor that you came all the way from US to India to study it?
One is that my research, I think you can't really learn things unless you go to the places. I came here in 2019 to walk the Mumbai attacks. Even though all that research has been done, I got more out of walking every site and going to the train station and having an understanding of every location and how the city breathes and everything. So that's one of the reasons I'm here. Why this operation, I think it's been undercovered, like you said, in so many wars, that two nuclear armed countries went at it with some very unique technologies, even beyond visual range missiles and aircraft and everything. But just the leadership that was shown during it, the technologies used, that it was under the nuclear kind of shadow, but wasn't. As we've been dealing with the Ukraine and Russia war, and that's kind of guided everything. Is like, you can't give Ukraine tanks; there'll be nuclear war. That kind of hit me as interesting, but the make in India as well, having understood that this was really the performance of that work. A lot of militaries go through these transformations and everything. The U.S. military, coming out of the global war on terrorism, as well as coming out of this transformation for something different. There's so many elements that fascinated me about Sindoor, from the strategic leadership that the Prime Minister showed during the war, to the communication, constant communication during the war, and how it was kept limited. And so many of the aspects of war that I teach about, like, how do you win a war, and what is war about, and everything, I see it in Sindoor. So, but I also knew that I can't understand it all unless I come here and talk to the leadership, walk in areas and really get the more than the internet can give you.
So what is your assessment now?
I'm not done with my research trip.
Any new thing that you learned here?
I'm learning more at that strategic level, that India's strategic plan isn't to go to war with Pakistan in any way. But I knew that, but I didn't really know the depth of how the government really is focused on development. So this is not a distraction, but this is a detractor to what the government wants. Where if you look on the other side with Pakistan, how it's building itself for certain things and isn't necessarily development. So I'm still working on that research line about, like, the strategic goals and why were those strategic goals, what it will change, as well as in, okay, you dominated in a war, you achieved your goal. What are the lessons that India is taking that I'm trying to pull from this, as well as I think I will write about what happened. That's one of my things that I do.
There are tactical lessons also, how the leadership behaves. Is that an angle that you are looking at?
Absolutely. So you look at, is there one shared message across all the leadership? So sometimes in governments you have different parts of the government saying different things, and it gives for ambiguous goals. There was a shared definition of what the goals were. And you saw it in every press brief, and didn't matter who it was, whether it was the Minister of External Affairs, the Prime Minister, the military, same message, same words. That was unique. I was really impressed by the press conference that the DGMOs did. It wasn't necessarily the words they were saying, but the evidence they were showing for their words. Every photo of every site that was hit, the explosion, because we live in this world of misinformation where you can make claims without evidence.
Yeah.
It's what we saw Pakistan doing.
Somebody asked them, like, where is the evidence of it?
That's right.
And that the minister said it's on social media.
That's right. That's right. So there's that. That's at strategic level. So those aren't tactics. That's strategic communication. And allowing the military, because militaries sometimes also they don't have the authorities to communicate. So allowing the military to communicate that level of transparency and classification, because most of that, there's pictures of bombs and stuff like that is classified.
Yeah.
So that lesson, again, I think will be missed if we don't record it quickly.
As a US soldier and as an analyst, as a scholar, sitting, far from here, what was your analysis of this situation that people are reacting so much about a couple or 3 or 4 or 5 jets being downed?
Yeah.
As if, the war is lost.
Yep. If I'm an objective analyst, though, which is more important, that India lost aircraft or that Pakistan failed to stop a single attack on a single site? For me, that in what we call, not just escalation dominance, controlling the escalation ladder, but that level of military dominance should be the story. We can talk about both stories, but one side really wanted the story to be about what jets were lost or whatever was lost, not the fact that they couldn't hit anything that they were shooting at, and India was able to achieve superiority and hit wherever they wanted from even beyond visual range. That's what I'm trying to focus on. I was like, why does the world want that to be the story for some reason? Or Pakistan want the story?
But that is clever, right?
Yeah.
Instead of, 9 or
It's called
10.
a bait and switch.
Yeah. Instead of, the world talking about 9 terrorist camps being hit.
Yep.
That actually proves that you have terrorist camps in your territory. The next day, you spin the story that was it the Russian jet that was downed, or whether the French jet was downed, or whether the Chinese. So it becomes, French versus Chinese thing. The information warfare that we talked about, the Israel-Hamas war, the same thing was, being played here. So it will be a part of, every war, this information warfare.
Will be.
But as you said, the real story is whether India was able to achieve the objectives.
Absolutely.
And in a completely dominating manner.
Yes, that has got to be the story. I mean, war is the pursuit of political objectives. The fact that India was able to achieve its objective, restrain itself to only those objectives, because like we said, we'd heard voices even within India going like, this is your chance. You got to take out these, whatever it is, terrorists or whatever it is. And was able to do it with overwhelming military force and control the escalation by showing restraint. Like, look, we just showed you what we could do. We'll take, then, Pakistan calls. You can't hide that. Pakistan calls and asks for an end to the operation. Those are the stories that need to be told. I can tell, everybody wants, again, to focus on the technologies. And yeah, if they had some unique technology that was able to do something that India didn't want it to do, that's a story.
For example, what Ukraine did with Russia.
That's right, with the Operation Spider's Web.
Yeah.
That's a huge story because it's unthinkable. But it isn't the strategic story, for sure.
Yeah. Indians are also kind of, very surprised at reaction of Donald Trump, US president, because, there was a lot of support in India for Trump. And they didn't like Biden that much because clearly there was friction between India and US in the last 4 years. But now they thought that, with Trump back in office, things will improve. But with Trump, praising Pakistan and especially after Sindoor, his comments that, I stopped the war and all these things, and India doesn't tolerate that third-party interventions. What are we getting wrong about US? What is US's goal when it comes to Pakistan, India? Why they are, why you guys are so much in love with Pakistan, despite the history, the bloody history, like what Pakistan did to US, playing the double game in Afghanistan, and no other country would have tolerated that.
Yeah, I get this a lot.
We don't understand this US policy. So please.
So one, trying to understand our president,
Yeah.
he communicates in a very unique way.
Yeah.
He posts on social media.
That's a diplomatic way to put it.
That's right. He communicates on social media in a very unique way.
Yeah.
He has a very strong foreign policy, international relations team. I do believe that the relationship between the United States and India is as prosperous and potential as it's ever been.
Why it remains at the potential level, never materializes.
There's a $500 billion trade deal that I would love to see go through. I would love to see India get the F-35. I would love for there to be an AI sharing agreement because India is going to lead the world in AI and laser technology and data integration. So many. Not my area of study. I know that all those conversations are being had. I think the foreign ministers in the United States right now, the president communicates in a very unique way. Pakistan's history with the United States is complex, going back even to like the defeat of the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, to the supposedly help with the global war on terrorism while playing a double game, and bin Laden's in the Abbottabad, and it's complex. Geopolitics is complex, and there is an element of wanting to have what we call over the horizon capability to strike at terrorists like ISIS-K, but India knows Pakistan better than anybody, and that there is this double game. I am not in the world of international relations and why There's relationships. I know that the relationship for Pakistan's and the United States is many years in the making. I hope there's a change towards, and I think there has been.
I think enough people have watched Homeland in US, right?
That's right. That's right.
So they should know that at least that season about Pakistan, they should definitely watch.
Problems in Afghanistan and the Taliban now, and the rise of, the problem's not going away. And I just saw the Minister of External Affairs in the United Nations with some very strong messages of, we can no longer tolerate state sponsor of terrorism. Of course, he's talking about Pakistan. Yeah. There are other places like Iran that we clearly not tolerating anymore. I think we actually see, I know Indians see it through the lens of India, Pakistan. I, as somebody who travels the world, see a shift in the opposite direction to allowing these states to do this state sponsor of terror. So I'm actually more hopeful than most people.
At the end, we have some rapid fire.
Sure.
Which is the best book or film that has, best captured the urban warfare scenario?
An urban warfare scenario. Black Hawk Down.
1993.
Yep.
Mogadishu, right?
Yep.
One city you would never want to fight in.
It's really a whole area, the Pearl River Delta. They have megacities that are growing into megacities. It's a nightmare just getting into that.
There was this talk before the election that, Trump, if he gets elected, he should send special forces to fight cartels.
Yeah.
How difficult that would be?
It wouldn't be that it would be difficult. All warfare is difficult. The cartels,
Will that be urban warfare or jungle warfare?
It could be limited urban warfare, but that was about, again, what is the goal? So the goal was about the southern border, right? The cartels, human trafficking, drug trafficking, helping terrorists get into the country. That element of what the goal would be if you were going to fight anything, anywhere. Why are you doing it, and making that connection of whether it's going to achieve the goal. Our border security is very national. It's a national security crisis, and there's already been a big change to it. So that's where if the cartels were going to keep doing that, then in order to deter that activity, you have to reduce capability and reduce the behavior.
Do you think that's a good idea?
That's a political question. I don't do politics.
It's a military question. Like, would the U.S. military be able to do?
Absolutely. The U.S. Special Forces would put
not so significant losses?
No. We could take out the cartel leadership. Again, we have a unique capability to be able to take out things, and Israel does as well. What Israel did to the leadership in Hezbollah and in Iran was, the world should be watching.
Crazy.
That takes intelligence. We do have a lot of intelligence about our southern border. So we would also be able to eliminate leadership. It's never about sending military to go kill everything. It's about, if this is a weakened capability, then if you take some leadership out, it does weaken capability. Although there's the mow the grass theory about that. But I don't think that's going to be necessary. My opinion, my answer to this question is, could it be possible? Absolutely. Would the U.S. Special Forces, some of ours, be very effective against that? Yes. And once the cartels recognized they don't want that fight, just like Iran signaled immediately they don't want that fight with the U.S. military, the beginning of the operation would signal the message, and it wouldn't go very long. Now, this isn't about, again, taking any ground or other
obviously not
scar tissue. We have scar tissue even with like cartels and the war on drugs and the Iran-Contra.
But don't you think that corruption in that society, politicians are involved, judges are involved, everybody in the society is involved with these cartel guys, and that would make your job very difficult? Or that is not a big thing?
Again, our job is not to run a society. The job is to deter somebody from doing cross-border.
If you're carrying out operations and intelligence, gets leaked and all these things, operations do become difficult when, people apart from the cartels, they also get involved somehow.
Yeah. It's kind of like Hezbollah. So like Hezbollah it's a good analogy because Hezbollah is both a military, but also has government officials in the Lebanese government.
Yeah.
there are nuances there. So you target a certain aspect of the cartel operations, like their human trafficking and their leadership for the drug trade and everything like that.
Okay.
These are all fictitious operations, but is it possible? Yes. Do I want to see it? No.
If you had to relive one day of your career, what would that be?
I got my ear bit off in a fight.
Really?
Yeah.
Where?
In Washington State when I was a ranger a long
Okay.
time ago. If I could relive that day, I would have walked away. There's no reason I needed to have that fight.
No, I meant in a good sense, like there would be
Oh,
some
like in a
glorious
good-
day,
oh, okay.
right? That you want to relive.
Oh, all right. Now I
Yeah.
see. Relive. So I was in the military with children. The birth of my first child was the change of my life in
When was that?
2011.
11. Okay.
I would relive that moment over and over again because changed everything.
What, like,
It changed my
What-
whole identity, like what I thought mattered most in life. Is you're a soldier, you think military is my life, and even your family comes second. I didn't have that. As soon as my first child was born, I recognized that was my goal in life, was to take care of him and raise and make them good people.
your wife was also a soldier, right?
Yes.
So that happened with her also?
Yep.
What Indians misunderstand the most about US foreign policy? Or US military, if you don't want to be political?
One, I think the U.S. military is they believe that we're all capable. And the U.S. military has limitations just like all militaries. We are expeditionary, so that's a uniqueness that most militaries don't have. So we're global. We can put forces anywhere in the world in a matter of 18 hours. I think American foreign policy is to believe that we have a grand strategy. They think there's one vision that the United States has, and it just changes so much with our administrations and our society that we're not fumbling our way through it, but we have a grand strategy sometimes and that's articulated, but we don't, and other times we don't. And we're in that period right now where if you have a lot of people on the far edges of a political environment, that it is from afar, like what's going on here, and you have different characters saying different things, but there is an underwriting American value system that's present and always. But in foreign policy, it gets hard. It's like, what are you guys doing?
Best soldiering you ever experienced?
I mean, my first tour in Iraq, the first month, it was everything that I thought it would be. The jumping in, I did a parachute assault. It's like a lot of people join the military with ideals about what the military is going to be like from the movies, right? So from Hollywood to Bollywood, they try to show you what the military is. Sometimes you join the military and it's nothing like that. My first few months in war was everything that I thought it would be. The band of brothers, the camaraderie, the eating together, sleeping together, all that bonding, and in firefights, relying on other people. I wrote about this in my first book called Connected Soldiers. It was everything I'd ever imagined. So that moment was the pinnacle of it all, because it's everything you want and what you thought it would be.
If you had to brief India's national security advisor, what would you warn him about?
Assumptions, right? So India, like all governments and militaries, have assumptions that often don't get challenged. So I would warn about assumptions towards, especially national security perspective, of what the enemy is trying to do. And it's some people call them black swans, like Mumbai. Like, those are failures of imagination. So October 7th wasn't a failure in defensive properties. There were plenty of signs, but it was really a failure of imagination, because they imagined their enemy was trying to do something else. So as a national security team, you can do exercises to challenge your assumptions. And
Actually, if you look at it, Pahalgam is also kind of a failure of this imagination, because you thought that because Pakistani terrorists will never attack tourists in Kashmir because it hurts Kashmiri populace.
Yeah.
Right?
But it's connecting the dots in that imagination. So what I've learned this trip is how much India had invested to improve tourism in the Kashmir, and how they didn't foresee that being a big threat to the terrorist. Is that a Kashmir prospering, an Indian, developed area of increased 22 million, I think it was last year.
True.
That would be a threat to your enemy.
Most underrated military tactic for generally and for urban warfare also.
The underground, I think, every war I've ever studied, it's they don't think about what's under their feet. I didn't when I fought. Now that I've been in Ukraine, Gaza, Azerbaijan, is you have to think about what's under your feet. So it's very underrated to this day. People think it's just, I'll deal with that when I get there, even though every city of every world has some type of underground. And now we're seeing some militaries like Israel developed a way to use the underground to their advantage. For some reason, militaries think it's a kind of an obstacle, a problem to deal with. Israel started using it to their advantage. So I think it's really underrated is the thinking about the underground in urban areas.
And in general, this is for urban warfare.
In general, I think soldiering, right? So this is what everywhere I've gone from Ukraine and Azerbaijan is that you still need soldiers who can do really hard things. Everybody tries to imagine that away. Some people in the military don't, but especially societies and everything, you still need, it isn't the age of cyber warriors where it doesn't matter if you're strong or anything. No, every war I've studied around the world still involves soldiers doing hard things.
What do you think when you look at those videos of FPV drones, hovering above soldiers and they are in their final moments? And then they kill, the drone kills the soldier. As a soldier, how do you feel about that?
I feel that you've left that soldier unprepared. So soldiering is about control. So like I used to think of a nightmare, and there's a couple like of World War II, like you jump in and your weapon gets cut away. So now you're a soldier in war without a weapon. That's like you have no control over your fate. That's what I think about when you see this soldier and there's a drone above him and he doesn't have anything to do. He can't do anything about it and knows he's going to die. I feel bad for who put that soldier there with nothing to give him some control, whether it's a shotgun or electronic warfare or something. So we have to make sure that's the goal of a leader in military is never leave a soldier with what they need in war.
Is there anything that they can do as soldiers?
Absolutely.
Some cheap tactics.
Absolutely. There's kinetic ways, right? So you can actually shoot at a drone and knock drones down. I mean, there's hundreds of cases of it. Even with a regular rifle, there's ways to shoot in front of it so it runs into it, like some old school things. And then there's electronic means. You can have, they call them defenders and things like that. You can just hit it and it falls out of the sky depending on what it is. Or you can use a shotgun. Like there's all kinds of things you can give soldiers, but you have to give them what they need for the threats they face. Yeah. If you're living in an environment like Ukraine, then you know that FPV drones are going to be a threat, so you better have some tool with you.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you so much for giving us so much time, and really enjoyed this conversation. And I wish you the best for your tour to India, and may you get the best inputs. And I'm looking forward to reading your take after your trip gets over.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.